Hello everyone, Mr. MC here. Welcome to the license test guide for the normal national B test, where I'll be going through all 10 license tests and explain what I do to get the gold time. And I'll leave a link in the description down below to the introduction video where I'll touch on the input settings that I'll be using, which is the DualSense controller, any controller settings, and any assist that I'll be using for the license test guides. And I'll leave a link in the description down below to the other license test guides as they get made. And additionally, all links to the replays are available down below, where you can add them to your collection on the web and you can view them in game along with the in-game tags to access them there as well. And for this video, I'll also have the miles per hour and kilometers per hour shown at the same time. And this video was recorded and edited as a version 1.50 update, otherwise known as the update that fixed the flying cyber bus glitch. But other than that, let's go ahead and get this started. Starting off with normal national B1. This license test is pretty straightforward, where all you need to do is get on the throttle, use the shift up and down buttons if you're using manual transmission to go up and down the gears, and once you reach a certain point, hit the brakes and stop in the blue and white checkered area. So let's go ahead and get this started. So one thing that I like to do with these license tests, especially with a lower power car like the Mazda Demio, is I like to get on the throttle just before the lights go off or when the start appears on your screen. And this is because if you get on the throttle a bit early, and if you get really unlucky to where you hit the rev limiter just as the start appears on your screen, you get a bit of a delayed start, which will hurt your time. You can still get a gold time if this happens, but that is something that I do want to point out because this has happened to me a couple of times when I was recording this. But anyways, we're going to go ahead and get the car going flat out. And just as the shift bar on the bottom of the screen fills up, I'm going to go ahead and shift up. So for me, I'm pressing the X button, as that is the button I have assigned to my shift up button. Square is my shift down button. And this is the only time where I'm going to let the shift bar fill up and blink, because with the Mazda Demio, you actually need to shift quite a bit earlier. And in this case, I'm going to shift up from second to third gear when the shift bar is around halfway full. And that's because with this car, its power peaks pretty early at around 4,000 RPM, which is actually before the shift bar even starts to fill up. So in reality, this car is kind of like a trick question. But if you let the shift bar go past the halfway point, you're going to notice quite a bit of a drop off in power, which means your acceleration will be slower, which means you will lose a bit of time. So here, shift bar being around halfway full, I'm going to go ahead and shift up from second to third gear. And this is another thing why I prefer being on manual transmission, because with some cars, you're going faster if you shift up earlier than usual because their powers peak up a bit earlier. So one car, for example, that you'll be seeing very soon where this happens is with the Daihatsu Koppen, where you're going to be shifting up when the shift bar is halfway full. So with that car, you do not want to rev it out. I think the Chevrolet Corvette Group 3 is another car where you want to shift up earlier than usual. The Suzuki VGT Group 3 is another car as well. And we go up to third gear and we're going to get ready to start to hit the brakes. You're going to see these cones on either side of the track, and these are going to be what's called our reference point. In this case, we're going to use these cones as our reference point to start to brake. And as you go along your racing career, you'll be able to eventually start to pick up on different reference points where you can use it to start to brake, start to turn in, or start to get on the throttle. But for this case, we're using these cones. Pick whichever one you like more, and we'll be using them as our braking points. So just as we are about to approach them, we're going to use all of our braking power and gradually shift down to first gear. and we're going to enter right into the blue and white checker area, and that is going to conclude our first license test. So this is just a matter of getting used to the throttle, the brakes, and the shift up and down buttons if you're using the manual transmission. Now we'll go through this again, but this time I will let the video play by itself. Alright, so for National B2, this is just like National B1, but we are in a faster and heavier car, the Mitsubishi GTO. So this test will demonstrate that because we are going even faster and because our car is heavier, we will need to brake even earlier compared to the Mazda Demio in National B1. So let's go ahead and get this started. Alright, so one thing I want to note is that in this case, the Mitsubishi GTO is an all-wheel drive, and when you get off of the starting line, this car has a pretty controlled launch, so you can get away with traction control being at 0 or off. So that's exactly what I'm going to do as we start our license test. And we actually get a pretty quick launch off of that, and we let the shift bar fill up and blink as we get ready to go from first to second gear. And luckily with this car, and most of the cars that we'll come across, you can just let the bar fill up, start to blink, and then shift up, just as we do from second to third gear. Now, just like with National B1, we're going to look for our reference point, which are these cones that are on either side of the track. Pick whichever one you prefer more to be your reference point, because just as you're about to approach them, you're going to start to get on the brakes, use all of your braking power, and gradually make your way down to first gear. And do note that unlike B1, we have to brake even earlier to make it into the blue and white checkered area. And that is all for National B2. Let's take a look at it again without me saying anything. Alright, so welcome to National B3, where we're going through Alsace Village in the Daihatsu Copen, and we're going to do this wonderful thing called Take a Turn. So this test will show us what it means to pick a reference point to initiate our turn in, hit an apex, hit the turn out point, and finally cross the finish line. Now let's get started with the test. And remember what I said in National B1 about this car? Yeah, with this car, you will need to shift a bit earlier than usual, and you'll be shifting when the shift bar on the bottom of the screen is around halfway full. If you let the car rev it out, then you will lose a bit of power, which will cost you a bit of time. And do note that I'm already starting to move the car towards the left side of the track into the curbs to get ready for turn number 1 at Alsace Village. And this is because we're about to approach our turning point. And if you have the driver markers assist turned on, these little yellow pins are our driving markers. And you'll see one for the turning point, which is what you're seeing in front of us now. You'll see one for the apex, which is hiding behind a tree. And eventually you'll see the turnout point. And these pins are great if you're learning a new track or if you're new to the game, as it basically lets you know that your car should be here, and this point is where you need to do a thing, where you need to turn in or where you need to hit the apex. And this is where you start to learn a bit more about the racing line, which is the fastest way around the track. And we'll go a bit more over the racing line as we go throughout the lessons. But let's say you have the driving markers turned off. Where the heck is our reference point? And for me, the reference point is going to be the start of the hay bales that is on the left. So once I'm about to reach those hay bales on the left, that's where I'm going to start to turn in. And you want to try to turn in as smoothly as possible. That way you don't lose too much speed. With this car, the Daihatsu Copen, it's a pretty slow car, which means we can actually take this turn flat out. So again, just as we hit our driver marker up in front, or as we approach our hay bales on the left, we start to turn in, trying to turn in as smoothly as possible, and we're going to hit this driver marker, which is where the apex is at. So for some, this is known as the clipping point, and normally in racing, this is where you start to get back on the throttle and start to reduce your steering input to exit the turn. But because we're in a pretty slow car, we're going through this turn flat out, which means that we're staying on full throttle power, and we're going to start to unwind our steering, and you'll eventually start to see our turnout pin that is just up ahead. Get close to it and go ahead and finish this license test. For National B4, this is just like National B3, but this time we're in a faster car, the Audi TT. And because we're going faster into turn number 1, we will need to turn in, but also slow down to be able to make it through turn number 1 at Alsace Village. So let's go ahead and get this started. Alright, so for National B4, we're going to use the same turning point that we used for National B3, which is this driving marker if you have that assist turned on, or the hay bales that are on the left. So just as you approach the hay bales on the left, you're going to start to turn in, but because we are going faster, we will need to slow down. Now you might think, hey, I'm going to need to use the brakes for this turn. Well, in this situation, it's actually possible to just simply lift off our throttle to reduce your speed and make it through this turn. So you'll be doing throttle control. So it is possible to get away with this license test without touching the brakes at all. So just as we approach our turning point, which is the hay bales on the left, we're going to start to turn in towards the right, turning in as smoothly as possible and start to lift off our throttle. For this turn, I'm going to completely lift off our throttle, so the car will be cruising for just a moment. And by cruising, I mean I'm not going to be using any throttle input. I'm not going to be using any braking input. So this will let the car turn in a bit more, and I'll be slowing down at the same time. So it'll let me make it through this turn, hit the apex, and once I hit the apex, I'll be able to get back on the throttle to reach the turn out point. So I'm going to start to turn in, let go of the throttle, and you can actually see me fiddling with the throttle input a bit to try to maintain my speed. And you will see me cut into the grass a bit, and you might think, hey, you're off the track. In Gran Turismo 7, for most tracks, the curbs are part of the track limits, so you can get away in some scenarios with dipping two wheels onto the grass and even passing the white lines that you see on the left. But I'm going to hit the apex, immediately get back on the throttle, aim towards the turnout point, and get ready to cross the finish line. Alright, so now that we've gone through the basics of using the throttle, using the brakes, and going through a simple turn, now we're going to go through a couple turns. And we're going to use the Autobianchi A112 Abarth, which is a pretty slow car, but we're going to try to go through these turns in a way that helps us minimize our time. As we get ready to start National B5, as soon as you start your license test, you want to bring yourself towards the left side of the track. And this is because we have a right turn coming up, which will almost immediately bring us to a left turn. So we're going to use a reference point for this right turn. And for me, the reference point is going to be the end of the orange barrier that is on the left. We are in a slow car, which means we can take this turn flat out. It's just a matter of trying to turn in as smoothly as possible to try to keep up our speed. And we're on this side of the track because this will let us maintain as much speed as possible. So we'll be able to go through this right turn as fast as possible. So this is where the whole notion about the racing line begins to form. So the racing line is the fastest way around the track, and you can actually see the tire marks on the tarmac, as that shows that this is where the cars go to try to maintain as much speed as possible as they go through Tsukuba circuit. So we're going to go ahead and start to turn in, trying to turn in as smoothly as possible. That way we can maintain as much speed as possible. And I know I've said that a million times, but I just want to make that clear. So we're going to go ahead and bring ourselves towards the left because we have a left turn coming up right away. And this is a pretty long, smooth left turn. So with the Autobanki, we can take this turn flat out so we can keep on using full throttle input. But we are in a bit of a slower car, which means that we can get away with not fully hitting the turnout point. We can actually take a bit of a shorter line. So you can see me bring myself a bit more towards the middle of the track. That way I can reduce track distance. This will not be the case in the next license test, as we'll be in a faster car. For National B6, this is just like National B5, but this time we will be in the Nissan 370Z, which is a faster car compared to the Autobanki. And you will need to be a bit more careful with your inputs, as it is possible to get a bit of wheel spin and lose control with this car. So let's go ahead and get started with the license test, where once again, bring yourself towards the left side of the track. And just like in the last license test, we're going to use the end of the orange barriers on the left as our turning point. Now, it is possible to get away with going through this turn without needing to touch the brakes. So I'm just going to lift off our throttle, which you already see here, and start to turn in. So I was actually carrying just enough speed to make it to the apex of this turn. And just as I hit the apex, I'm going to gradually start to get back on our throttle. So this is where you want to be careful about being too aggressive getting back on the throttle, because this is where you can get some wheel spin and potentially lose control. Now bring yourself towards the left, and for this left turn, it is possible to take it flat out, but you can do a little lifting off our throttle to let yourself turn in a bit more, and to make sure that you don't get any unnecessary wheel spin, and that way you'll be able to safely make this turn and cross the finish line. And do note that unlike in the last license test, this time I'm using the entire width of the track to try to maintain my speed. For National B7, we're at Trail Mountain with the Toyota GR86, and our goal here is to find reference points to use as our braking, turn-in, and accelerating points when we hit the apex. And just like in the previous test, our goal is to try to carry as much speed as possible to get into the goal time territory. So let's get this started. Alright, so as we get ready to start the license test, you can let the shift bar fill up and blink a bit before going up to 5th gear, but then bring yourself towards the right side of the track because you're going to look for a reference point to use as your brake marker. So what we're going to do is we're going to approach this yellow sign that is on the right, and we're going to use that as our reference point to start to brake. So this is our braking marker. But in this scenario, we're going to brake just after we start to pass it. So I'll show you exactly when I start to brake right about now. So this is exactly where I start to brake, just after passing the yellow sign that was on the right. I'm going to brake in a straight line using all of my braking power, and then I'm going to wait until I approach the next reference marker before I start to turn in. So if you have the driver marker's assist, you use the yellow pin as your reference point to start to turn in. If you have it off, it's before you reach the end of the curb that is on the right. So I'm going to gradually start to turn in, and at some point I'm going to start to ease off of the brakes to let myself turn in a bit more. And there is a term where you start to ease off the brakes while turning in, and that is known as trail braking. You will see just a little bit of that in this example, but I do lift off of the brakes pretty quickly here. So starting to gradually turn in before the curb on the right ends, going down to 4th gear, and I'm going to ease off of the brakes and start to turn in, go down to 3rd gear, and I'm aiming for the apex, which is actually where this boulder on the left is. And on Trial Mountain, you can go into the striped areas without any consequence, so that is still part of track limits. So we're using the entire track to our advantage and bringing ourselves as close as we can to the boulder that is on the left. So as soon as I reach the boulder, I'm going to keep turning in, but I'm going to gradually start to ease on the throttle and look for the turnout point, which you can see as the driver marker. I'm going to aim for that and unwind my steering. For National B8, we're going through Mount Panorama and the Mitsubishi Lancer Evo 4 GSR. So we're going through turn number 1, but it is slightly tricky, part of it having to do with the car itself and how it likes to slide out a little bit. So we'll go through this license test now. So as we get started with the license test, bring yourself towards the right side of the track, and you're going to want to look for a braking point. So for me, I'm using the halfway point in between the 50 and the 100 meter boards as my braking point. So I'm braking at around the 75 meter mark. But do note that it is possible for someone to crash into these meter boards and knock them out of the way. So if that happens, well, now you don't have a braking point anymore. So it is important that for areas like these, you want to have a secondary braking point. That way, if it gets knocked out, then you can just refer to something else that can be used as your brake marker. So in this case, I'm starting to brake at the 75 meter mark, but in case those signs are knocked out, there are 3 other brake markers that you can potentially use to fall back on. One of them being the lamp that is on the right, so brake before you pass it. The second one is braking before the pit garage on the left ends. And the third one being braking before the fence on the left ends. So now you have 3 potential reference points that you can use as backup in case the 50, the 100 meter boards, or both of the meter boards are knocked out. But because they're still here, I'm going to use those 50, 100 meter boards as my reference markers. So I'm braking at the 75 meter mark, braking in a straight line, and using all of my braking power. And as I'm slowing down, I'm going to make my way down to third gear, and I'm going to use the 50 meter board as my reference marker to get ready to turn in. So I'll be turning in just after the 50 meter board. So full braking power in a straight line, down to third gear, and just after the 50 meter board, I'm getting ready to start to turn in. In case that 50 meter board is knocked out, you can use this lamppost on the right as your turning point. Now do be careful, because once you ease off of the brakes, the car is going to turn in quite a bit. So the car is going to step out a bit, and I'm actually going to start to get on the throttle just before I hit the apex, because the car is already starting to point in the general direction of where I want to go. So I'm going to go ahead and get back on the throttle, and I'll be able to hit the turn out point. So here I'm catching the car and actually kind of just taking advantage of how squirrely this car can get to try to get a fast exit. Alright, so for National B9, we are in the Honda Civic over at Dragon Trail Seaside. Now, this one's a little interesting because the first turn we'll be going through a flat out, but then almost immediately after we have to get ready to brake for a pretty sharp turn. And this car is a front wheel drive, so you have to be careful with your inputs, more specifically your braking and throttle inputs, to try not to get too much understeer where the car doesn't want to turn because there's no front grip available. But now let's go through this license test. So bring us up towards the left, and this right turn can be taken flat out. So if you need a reference point for your turning point, you can use this area on the left as your reference point to turn in. So you're actually turning in before you pass it. Now, because in Gran Turismo 7, the curves for most tracks are still part of track limits, we can go pretty deep into the turn. So you're going to see me cheese a bit of this right turn coming up. And we're going to go through it flat out. Again, going pretty deep into this turn, and immediately after bringing ourselves towards the left because we have to get ready to brake for this hairpin that is just up ahead. And for this turn, I'm going to use the start of the grass on the left as my reference point to start to brake, and I'm going to brake as much as I can in a straight line. You don't want to turn and use all of your braking power because the car will get a bit squirrely, especially if you're on the curves, which can cost you quite a bit of time or potentially cause the car to lose control. So right here, just as the grass on the left starts, I'm starting to hit the brakes. I'm going to brake as much as I can in a straight line and get ready to turn in. So I'm going to make my way down to third gear, starting to turn in before the curb on the left ends. And as I'm turning in, I'm going to start to ease off of the brake, so doing a bit of trail braking as I try to hit the apex. So as I ease off of the brakes, the car will start to turn in a bit more. It's going to get ready to hit the apex, and as I hit the apex, I'm going to start to get on the throttle. But as I mentioned in the introduction to this lesson, I need to be careful with how much throttle input I'm using, because if I use all my throttle power, I'm just going to get a bunch of wheel spin with the front wheels, as this car is a front wheel drive, which means I'm going to get a bunch of understeer. The car's not going to want to turn, and I'm going to end up going off of the track. So I'm going to use most of my throttle input so I can start to gain a bit of speed while still having the ability to make it through the exit of this turn. So I'm using around 90% of throttle input to try to make sure I make it through this turn. And once I know I'm going to make it through this turn, then I use all my throttle input. Alright, so here we are at the end of the normal National B license, and with National B10 we are using the Renault Clio RS220 trophy at Tsukuba Circuit. We'll be going through multiple turns, and you want to be careful with your braking and throttle inputs, as this car is a front wheel drive, which means the front wheels are the ones getting powered by the engine, so it's pretty easy to get a little too much wheel spin and end up understeering off of the track. So throttle input, especially throttle input, will be pretty important here. Alright, so let's go ahead and get this started to get your National B license. So this left turn, easily go through it flat out. Same with this right turn, you can easily take a flat out, but you need to get ready for the first braking zone. And I'm going to use the end of the curb on the right as my reference point, and I'm going to brake before the curb on the right ends, and I will brake in a straight line to make sure that I can make it to the entry of the hairpin. So right about here is where I'm going to start to brake, braking in as straight of a line as possible, and we're going to gradually make our way down to second gear. So right about here we're going to go down to third gear, and we only need to use just a little bit of turning input to bring ourselves towards the start of the hairpin. It's not going to be until around here where the curb on the right ends where we're going to start to turn in a bit more and then make our way down to second gear. And as we start to turn in, we're going to eventually start to ease off of the brakes to let the car turn in a bit more, hit the apex, and then we'll gradually start to get back on the throttle to start to exit our turn. So we can actually use a reference point as our cue to start to get back on the throttle. So as we hit the apex, you can notice that we're starting to point away from the Bridgestone sign just up ahead, and we can use that as our reference point to start to get back on the throttle. Now don't forget to go back up to third gear as you exit the turn, and just be really careful with your throttle input so you don't get too much understeer. Now bring yourself towards the left, and this part may be familiar because we've done a couple B license tests here before. So end of the orange barrier on the left, that's where we turn in, using just a little bit of braking input to make sure that we can make it to this turn, hit the apex, and gradually get back on the throttle so you don't get too much wheel spin on the front tires, as this car is a front wheel drive, because you don't want to understeer off of the track. And then go up to fourth gear, and this left turn you can take it flat out. And let's go through this again, but this time I will not stop the video. And that is it for the normal National B license test. Hopefully this guide has helped you out in getting closer or even reaching the gold territory, so that you can enjoy the 2 free cars for getting all gold and all bronze in the National B license. But alright, so this one took a while to make, as I was trying to figure out how the heck I wanted to go about making this video, and just trying to record really good runs for each of the license tests. And there was also just life keeping me super busy, so I haven't had as much time to make videos at all for my YouTube channel. And yeah, this project got delayed quite a few times, but hopefully it won't take as long to get the normal National A license guide out. And I know someone's probably gonna ask, why am I making this? Well, one, we had a physics change in 1.49, and two, I think it was near the start of the game I did start making the guides, but then I kind of just moved on from it. But this time I want to try to go through all the license tests, including the master license test, and see how long it takes to actually get them all out. Hopefully not too long, but we'll see how long it takes. But that's all from me. If you like this video helped you out, feel free to give this video a like, subscribe, and all that good stuff. But that's going to be for me. This is Mr. MCA, and I'll see you in the next video.